Well, as a general rule, it's pretty sporadic. We don't have a lot of major crimes here, but when we do have major crimes, we get quite a bit of coverage. Sometimes it's good coverage, in other words, real investigative reporting, and other times it's just very cursory coverage, in other words, they just come and film and that's it. Well, one good media coverage story is we had a double homicide this year, and during the double homicide, the news media did come out. Unfortunately, they came out so early in the investigation, it made it hard for us to put out a really accurate and adequate story for them until later in the afternoon. So it does, when we're already overwhelmed, to try to help the media out, sometimes it's just too much. Yeah, absolutely, come back, and we did do a press release and multiple stories beyond that. But news is only fresh for so long, and so they only will show interest for so long. Sometimes. It depends on what it is. I feel that items of interest are always going to be well done. For example, we did the 9/11 ceremony here in Hilliard. We have the largest 9/11 memorial outside of New York City. And they did come and do really nice coverage on that. But we orchestrated that. In other words, we told them where it was, when it was going to happen, and everything else. So really it was more of a spoon-fed story than them, the news media themselves, doing some kind of groundbreaking storytelling. Having said that, though, they covered it very well, covered the speeches, talked about the background of the park and things like that, so it turned out well. I've only had bad coverage on one case, and it really came down to how they portrayed it. It wasn't 100% wrong, but I asked them to do something and they didn't do it, so I kind of got turned off by that. But on the other hand, I've had a lot of news reporters do exactly what I wanted for a specific reason. For example, we had a case here a few years ago that involved an eBay situation. And what was happening is a person was using that house to deliver goods to from eBay. The house was vacant, and I did not want them to put the exact address on the news, because then I was afraid those victims would become victims yet again of people coming and stealing copper and things like that. And so that time the news media did a great job of doing exactly what I wanted, got the story they needed, and we were able to work together. And then additionally, that reporter went out and then asked other folks in the community if they had been victims of similar types of crime resulting from the internet, and made it a much better story. Absolutely, I think publicity can prevent a fair trial. In this country, we're not guilty until proven guilty. Many times in the news, the person is already convicted by either the way the news is purported or the way it's covered. Seldom does the suspect talk to the news, although I have had cases where they have and actually confessed to the news media, which is kind of interesting. Generally, that's not admissible in court because we don't have access to the entire recording. The news organizations generally will claim a First Amendment right and not provide that to us because they're afraid of background chatter on the camera, maybe two reporters talking about things that they shouldn't be talking about, maybe unprofessional conduct or something like that. And they wouldn't want that to escape out because it would look bad on that news organization. I think many times they provide too much information, and many times they provide inaccurate information. But that's not always the case. It just depends on the scenario that's there. Yeah, like the eBay story was a good example. They kind of went the way we wanted to. And then, not that we should always control what the media is getting as information, but it helped make it a better story. I can give you another example just like that. We had a situation where we had 18 burglaries in the same subdivision over the course of a month. During that time, my officers went and arrested 2 folks that were breaking into the houses while it was in progress. And what happened was they were able to not only apprehend the person, but we were able to link them to those 18 burglaries. One of those people that was burglarized was a very high-ranking person within the state government. Okay, that person did not want his address out in the public eye. So if the news media had asked and had done their homework, they would have noticed that this gentleman had had his house broke into. This has been a long time ago. Knowing that he did not want to be out in the public eye, I was able to find another one of the victims that was willing to speak to the media and talk about don't leave your windows open, and basically a crime prevention kind of story. Don't leave your windows open when the weather changes and things like that. And by doing that and making a crime map and everything else, I was able to direct that particular news reporter. I gave her her entire story, who she needed to talk to, and everything else. So the story went out great. I mean, it looked great, but it protected that one person, although in the public eye would have made a great story, protected his home and his family. And I really didn't have a problem doing that. But if they had asked me directly, is this person this particular individual, I would have said yes, because I would not have lied for them. So in that case, it really didn't add to the story. He's still just one of the 18 victims, but it would have been sensationalized and probably to the detriment of the situation. It'd be great if other professions would receive more attention, but the problem is that only the public ones are going to. As news folks know, they don't have the ability to get into the private companies as much as they do the public ones. And that's because public, we're required to have more transparency because we're paid for by tax dollars and things like that. So the private sector is a totally different, really different entity. It'd be nice that they'd be able to go up to the CEO of General Motors and ask them why they've outsourced so many jobs to another company. He's not going to talk to you. It's going to be some public information person. So, whereas you could come and talk to a chief of police or a mayor or a governor because they're public employees, they're kind of expected to do that, even if they don't want to talk about what you want to talk about. Well, I think the crimes that should get the most attention are ones that have the most impact on the community. Not necessarily the impact from scaring people. The likelihood of you being killed in your lifetime is very, very slim. The likelihood of you having something stolen from you is very great. Okay? Statistically, you're going to have some theft done to you. You're going to be a victim of theft way more times than you're going to be a victim of murder. And clearly, you're not going to be a victim of murder twice because you can't die twice. But the bottom line is there's a lot more theft than there is, say, murders or rapes or other things like that, or robberies. As a matter of fact, statistically, all those crimes are down and have been for almost 20-some years. So it's one of those types of things. Obviously, murders make it because there is nothing more serious than death. Okay, so that's number one. And also, I think more people would have a concern about fatalities in their neighborhoods because it could reflect on them. In other words, if a person dies in an auto crash, that could happen to any of us at any one time. That's why we usually call them accidents. But if someone's murdered in your neighborhood, that might be a little closer to home. The difference would be, though, is what if it's a murder-suicide? You know, I murder my wife and then I shoot myself. Should not be near as problematic for the community as, say, some guy that breaks into a house and shoots somebody. Not generally. I try to avoid that if I can, especially if I'm the lead investigator, because I don't want to say something that's going to jeopardize my investigation. So I might have a PIO do that for me, public information officer, or one of my other partners that's not as involved, if they're willing to do it. I'm generally pretty good to give face time, even on an event that's right ongoing, as long as I can limit just how long it's going to go. Most media outlets only want a 20-second to 30-second blurb anyway. That's fine. Usually I won't stumble on myself too much in that time. I can usually just do the basics. And then they usually have the background as well.
Prior arrests and convictions.
Well, there's a yes and a no to that question. One of the biggest problems is that people start to make preconceived assumptions about somebody based on their previous record. Recidivism in certain types of crimes is high, but just because I did something before doesn't mean I did this particular event today. And I think sometimes it's kind of like a trial in the press, and I think that becomes a problem because now that person doesn't have the opportunity to have his fair and impartial trial because everyone's heard that Bill Johnson has now done it.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's hard to get that, and that's why they have to do the change of venues and everything else, which causes a lot of stress on the court systems. But having said that, I think that if it was relevant to the neighborhood, like sexual offenders are pretty popular people to label and put out there, and so they do spend a lot of time with that. That is usually public record. I don't have such a big problem with the public record, but when they do a lot of extra digging, sometimes that can be detrimental to that individual's, stereotyping or whatever, labeling really. I think go back to, it is an obligation in a sense if you're looking at a news type of situation. There's two reasons to cover the story. One is to cover what's happened and maybe the impact on those folks' life. The second would be to try to put out some kind of crime prevention message, how not to become a victim of this crime, how to prevent this from happening in your community. There's only 23 to 24,000 law enforcement officers in the state of Ohio, and there's millions of citizens. So we can't be everywhere, and we can't make sure all your stuff is secured and everything else. So it takes a community effort. We're part of that community effort to ensure that you're protected. We can't protect you 24 hours a day. I can't even tell you that I'm not going to walk out of here and something's going to happen to me. So many times we just try to educate the public. I think that's one of the big functions that sometimes gets missed because it's not real cool to do stories on that. A lot of news folks don't want to do that. It's kind of been done too many times. Well, if it was so effective and done so many times, why are we still having the same problem? Yes, the way that the story is covered could definitely create a stereotype. If you label somebody, this guy did a rape, he now becomes a rapist, whether he's convicted or not. The other is that it allows, when you talk about doing opinions and stuff like that, yes, coverage creates a bias, because if your producer or your editor only wants to see a certain kind of story, then that's what you're going to cover. So it's always going to look like that's always the problem. Perhaps, too, if your paper that you work for or your news organization has a political slant, you have to report to that political slant. It would be no different than if I worked for PETA and I was a public information officer. I can't come out and say, hey, I just can't wait to go out and go hunting this weekend. It's not going to look real good, right? If I'm mad, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, I'm a PIO for them, it's not going to look good. I can't wait to go out and crack a few beers with the guys. It looks really bad because now it's like a double message. So yes, it can. The other thing I don't like about how crime coverage is sometimes done is many times news reporters will put their own personal bias out there, their own personal opinion. And I think their job is to really report the news. If they want to do their own opinion, that's called an editorial, and it should be done as an editorial so that people don't believe, oh, what he just said is really fact, when in reality it's just their opinion based on either what they saw or whatever. But who knows if it's out of context? You just don't know.